The chamber was so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. Admiral Mira Vaughn stood at its center, a single human woman on a floating platform of white stone, surrounded by 10,000 alien eyes that watched her with hatred, curiosity, and fear. This was the Grand Tribunal of the Galactic Council, the most powerful governing body in the known universe. Representatives from 800 species filled the ascending tiers that spiraled upward like the inside of a shell. Some had scales. Some had wings. Some existed as pure light contained in magnetic fields. All of them had one thing in common. They had ruled the stars for millions of years before humanity learned to make fire, and now they wanted human blood. You are charged with the destruction of the combined Armada's first fleet, said High Arbiter Thessanak from his elevated throne. His body was made of living crystal, and blue light pulsed through him like a heartbeat. His voice echoed through the chamber like the ringing of a massive bell. 4,000 vessels. 11 billion souls. The greatest military loss in galactic history. The gallery erupted. Alien voices screamed in languages that had no human translation. A massive creature with 6 arms pounded its fists against its platform. A cloud of intelligent insects swarmed in angry patterns that spelled words of accusation. Admiral Vaughn did not move. She stood perfectly still, her torn uniform hanging from her shoulders, fresh burn scars tracing lines across her left cheek. She had not slept in 4 days. She had traveled directly from the battlefield to this chamber, and she could still smell smoke in her hair. Silence, Thessanak commanded, and the chamber obeyed. He turned his crystalline gaze back to the human woman. Do you deny these charges? Vaughn lifted her chin. I do not deny that the first fleet was destroyed. I was there when it happened. More screaming from the gallery. A creature that looked like a serpent made of silver called for her execution. A being of pure shadow grew larger with rage, but Vaughn continued speaking, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I also do not deny that my fleet saved the other 9. 200 trillion lives across 47 worlds. I saved this council. I saved this galaxy. And I would do it again. The silence that followed was absolute. The Sinak leaned forward on his throne. The light inside him flickered with something that might have been surprise. You speak boldly for a species that has been part of this council for only 30 years. Your people are children among us. Your technology is primitive. Your military strength is laughable. And yet, Vaughn replied, when the Hollow came, when your great armada fell, it was human ships that answered, not yours. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. No one spoke to the High Arbiter this way. No species had dared to challenge the Council's authority in 10,000 years. Thessanak's crystalline form darkened. You will explain yourself, human. You will tell this tribunal exactly what happened at the Temporous Expanse. And if your explanation does not satisfy us, you will be executed as a war criminal. Vaughn nodded slowly. Then let me start at the beginning. 6 months ago, when the Council still believed it was invincible, the holographic projectors activated, and the chamber was filled with stars. The entire galaxy hung in the air around them, beautiful and terrible. The Hollow emerged here, Vaughn said, pointing to a region at the galaxy's edge where the stars seemed to fade into nothing. They were not ships. They were not creatures. They were holes in reality itself. Spaces between dimensions that had somehow learned to think, to want, to hunger. The projection showed the first attack. A peaceful colony world, green and blue like Earth, suddenly flickering like a broken light. Then it was simply gone. Not destroyed, erased, as if it had never existed at all. 3 colonies vanished before anyone understood what was happening. Vaughn continued. The Council responded by assembling the greatest military force in galactic history. 10 fleets from the 10 most powerful civilizations. 40,000 warships. The combined armada. She paused. Earth was not invited to contribute. We were told our ships were too slow, our weapons too weak, our species too young to be trusted with such an important mission. Counselor Veth, the chief prosecutor, rose from his seat. His body was serpentine, covered in scales that shifted color with his emotions. Right now, they were red with anger. The council made a reasonable decision based on military capability. Human technology is centuries behind galactic standard. Yes, Vaughn agreed. Our ships are slower. Our weapons are weaker. But we understood something that your greatest scientists missed. We understood what the Hollow actually were. She turned to address the full assembly. While your armada prepared for a conventional battle, a human physicist named Leonard Price was studying the Hollow's attack patterns. He discovered that they were not invading our dimension. They were existing in the gaps between dimensions. They fed on intelligent life by pulling it into those gaps, where victims remained conscious and aware while being slowly consumed over centuries of subjective time. Horror rippled through the gallery. Many of these species had lost people to the Hollow. They had wondered what happened to those who were taken. Now they knew. Dr. Price also discovered their weakness, Vaughn continued. The Hollow could be bound. They could be forced into dimensional coherence and made solid, vulnerable, killable. The process required a very specific type of energy. Signature. She paused. Human faster-than-light drives operate on a different principle than galactic standard technology. We use dimensional threading. We anchor our ships to multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. To the galaxy, this makes our drives slow and inefficient. To the Hollow, it makes them poison. Understanding began to dawn in the eyes of the assembly. The creatures who had mocked human technology for 30 years suddenly realized that they had missed something fundamental. I brought this information to the council, Vaughn said. I requested permission to join the combined armada. I was refused. High Arbiter Vesenak himself told me that humanity had nothing to offer. Vesenak did not deny it. Then the armada engaged the Hollow at the Temporous Expanse, Vaughn said softly. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Every fleet was disabled. Every ship went dark. 40,000 vessels drifted in the void while the Hollow began to feed. She looked directly at the High Arbiter. And that is when Earth made a choice. We could stay home. We could let the galaxy die and take our chances alone. Or we could send our children to fight for species that had treated us with nothing but contempt for 3 decades. Her voice hardened. We sent 200 ships, 40,000 human souls. We knew the mathematics. We knew not all of us would come home. But we went anyway, because that is who we are. Counselor Veth rose again. A touching story, Admiral, but it does not address the charges. When your fleet left that battlefield, the first fleet was completely destroyed. 11 billion dead. The prosecution will prove that you could have saved them, that you chose to let them die. Vaughn met his gaze without flinching. The prosecution, she said quietly, does not understand what it means to fight a war without good choices. But by the time this tribunal ends, everyone in this chamber will. She turned back to the assembly, to the thousands of alien eyes watching her with judgment and fear. You want to know what happened at Temporous Expanse. You want to know why the first fleet died while 9 others survived. I will tell you everything, every decision, every sacrifice, every life we could not save. She took a breath. And when I am finished, this council will have to decide something far more important than my guilt or innocence. You will have to decide what kind of galaxy you want to live in. One where the young and weak are left to die, or one where those who can help do help regardless of the cost. The chamber was silent, and Admiral Mira Vaughn began to tell the story of how humanity saved the galaxy. The holographic display above the tribunal shifted to show a moment frozen in time. A human science station on Earth's moon, 6 months before the trial. Inside a small laboratory, a man with gray hair and tired eyes stared at data that should have been impossible. Dr. Leonard Price had spent his entire career studying the edges of known physics. He had been dismissed by his colleagues, ignored by funding committees, and forgotten by the scientific community. Now he was looking at something that would change everything. "They are not attacking us," he whispered to himself. "They are reaching through." The hollow left holes in reality. Empty spaces where data should exist, but did not. Most scientists saw nothing when they looked at these gaps. But Price had spent 40 years learning to see what others missed. He saw patterns in the emptiness, shapes in the void. The hollow existed between dimensions. They fed by pulling victims into those spaces where time moved differently. A few seconds in normal reality could be centuries in the gap. Victims remained alive, aware, and utterly alone while being slowly digested. But dimensional gaps could be closed. If enough energy was applied in the right configuration, the holes could be filled. The hollow could be made solid, and solid things could be destroyed. Price ran to Admiral Vaughn's office that same night. She was the commander of Earth's 3rd Defense Fleet, and one of the few human officers who had earned any respect in galactic circles. She listened to his theory for 3 hours without interruption. "You are saying," she finally said, "that our drives can hurt them. Our primitive, outdated, laughable drives. The dimensional threading creates anchors across multiple planes," Price explained. "When fully extended, those anchors force coherence in a localized area. The hollow cannot exist in coherent space. They become solid, vulnerable. What is the cost?" Price hesitated. "Ships maintaining full anchor extension cannot move. They become fixed points in spacetime. If the hollow attack while the anchors are extended, the ships cannot retreat." Vaughn closed her eyes. She understood what Price was not saying. This was not a weapon. It was a trap. And the bait was human lives. She took his findings to Earth's United Planetary Council. The debate lasted 3 days. "Why should we die for species that hate us?" demanded Councilman Harwell, slamming his fist on the table. "The Jesser Dominion has voted against human interests 17 times. The Krethian Star Empire refused to trade with us for a decade. The Illithar Collective called humanity a plague upon the stars." "That is all true," Councilwoman Helena Torres replied. "But none of it matters." "How can it not matter?" Torres stood and walked to the window where Earth hung blue and beautiful against the stars. "Because they cannot save themselves. And we can." The vote was narrow. Earth would send its fleet, but Torres insisted on one condition. Everything would be documented. Every scan, every transmission, every decision. If humanity's children were going to die for a galaxy that despised them, the truth would survive. The 3rd Defense Fleet departed 3 days later. 200 ships carrying 40,000 humans. They were farmers' sons and doctors' daughters. Engineers who had never fired a weapon and soldiers who had never seen real combat. They knew the mathematics of what they were attempting. They knew the odds. They went anyway. Admiral Vaughn stood on the bridge of her command ship, the Endurance, as Earth shrank behind them. Her first officer, Commander David Okonkwo, stood beside her. "The crew is ready," he said quietly. "But I need to ask you something, Admiral. Do you believe this will work?" "I believe in Dr. Price's calculations," Vaughn replied. "I believe in our people. I believe that doing nothing is not an option. That is not what I asked." Vaughn turned to face him. "No, David, I do not believe we will all survive. I believe we will lose friends. I believe we will lose ships. I believe some of us will not go home. Then why are we doing this? Vaughn looked back at the stars. Because somewhere out there, in those drifting ships, there are beings who are afraid. They are hiding in the dark, listening to their crewmates disappear one by one. They do not care about politics. They do not care about treaties. They just want someone to help them. She paused. Earth remembers what it means to be alone in the dark. We remember the wars that nearly destroyed us. The plagues. The famines. We know what it is to feel abandoned by the universe. Her voice hardened. We will not abandon them, even if they would have abandoned us. The fleet traveled for 11 days. During that time, they received no communications from the combined armada. The galaxy had gone silent. The Council's greatest military force had simply vanished. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a civilian physicist traveling aboard the carrier Prometheus, spent those days refining the anchor deployment calculations. She was brilliant, exhausted, and terrified. Every adjustment she made determined which ships would live and which ships would die. "It is not enough," she said during one late-night meeting with Admiral Vaughn. "We can create binding zones, but they will be too small. The hollow will simply move around them. What if we use overlapping zones?" Vaughn asked. "Then we need more ships in fixed positions. More targets." Vaughn nodded slowly. "How many ships would we lose?" Elena did not answer. She did not need to. The numbers were written in her eyes. On the 12th day, the Third Defense Fleet arrived at the Temporous Expanse. What they found was a graveyard. About 40,000 ships drifted in the void, their lights dark, their engines cold. The combined armada, the greatest military force in galactic history, had been reduced to floating tombs. And among those ships, something moved. A hollow appeared on sensors as absences. Holes in the data where information should exist. They slid between the drifting vessels like shadows between stars, reaching into hulls, taking crew members one by one. Billions of beings hid in those ships. They had barricaded themselves in rooms with no power, breathing recycled air, listening to the screams of those who were taken. Some had been waiting for 11 days. Some had given up hope. And then, on their sensors, they saw something impossible. 200 points of light. Emerging from dimensional space at the heart of the massacre, the human fleet had arrived. Admiral Vaughn looked at the horror on her view screen and felt something cold settle in her chest. The hollow were everywhere. They swarmed through the disabled fleet like parasites through a corpse. The binding zones she had planned would not be enough. Not nearly enough. "Admiral," Commander Okonkwo said quietly, "we need more anchors. We need to spread wider. If we spread wider, we lose coverage. The zones will have gaps. Then some ships will die." Vaughn closed her eyes. This was the moment she had dreaded. The moment when mathematics became murder. "Navigation," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Plot anchor positions for Operation Lighthouse. Priority targets are fleets 2 through 10. Maximum coverage for extraction zones." "Admiral," the navigator replied, "that formation leaves the First Fleet outside our protection radius." Vaughn looked at the tactical display. 4,000 ships of the Thesser Dominion, the oldest civilization in the galaxy, the species that had fought hardest against humanity's admission to the Council. They were deepest in the hollow swarm. Reaching them would require extending beyond safe anchor coverage. It would mean losing everything. "I know," she said softly. "Implement the formation." Commander Okonkwo stared at her. "We are abandoning them. We are saving everyone we can." Vaughn turned to face her crew. "The First Fleet has been under assault for 11 days. 80% of their crews have already been taken. We cannot reach them without losing our ability to save the others. But the mathematics, The mathematics say we can save 9 fleets or 0 fleets. Vaughn's voice cracked. There is no option where everyone survives. There is only the choice of how many we lose. She looked back at the first fleet, drifting in the darkness, surrounded by hungry shadows. May they forgive us, she whispered. And may we forgive ourselves. The human fleet began its advance. The Hollow noticed the human fleet immediately. They turned from their feeding like wolves sensing new prey. For a moment, everything stopped. The galaxy held its breath. Then the shadows attacked. Lieutenant, Commander Owen Burke watched the assault unfold from the tactical station aboard the cruiser Defiant. His screens showed readings that should have been impossible. Ships existed and did not exist at the same time. Crew signatures flickered between dimensions. Reality itself bent around the approaching darkness. They are targeting our formation, he reported, his voice steady despite the fear climbing up his spine. Multiple contacts converging on our position. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood at the center of the bridge, calm as stone. Begin anchor deployment. All stations prepare for dimensional threading. The Defiant shuddered as its engines shifted into a configuration they were never designed for. Energy surged through systems that had only been tested in simulation. The ship's hull groaned like a creature in pain. On the bridge view screen, the Hollow approached. They were not visible in any normal sense. They were gaps, tears in the fabric of reality where light did not reach. Burke had developed a method for tracking them through their shadows, the residual distortions they left behind. But tracking and stopping are different things. Anchor extending, the engineer reported. 60%. 70%. The first Hollow reached the Defiant's outer hull. Burke watched his screens go insane. Temperature readings spiked and plummeted simultaneously. Gravity fluctuated. Time itself seemed to stutter. Crew members in the lower decks began screaming over the comm system. They are breaching. Someone shouted. Maintain anchor extension, Tanaka ordered. We hold this position. The screaming stopped. 3 crew signatures vanished from Burke's display. They had not died. They had simply ceased to exist in normal spacetime, pulled into the gaps between dimensions, where they would remain conscious for centuries while being slowly consumed. Burke forced himself to look away from the empty spaces on his readout. There was no time for grief. Not yet. Anchor at full extension. The engineer reported dot around the Defiant. Reality solidified. The dimensional threading created a zone of forced coherence, a bubble where the Hollow could not exist in their natural state. The shadows that had been reaching for the ship suddenly froze. They became solid, visible dot, and the weapons officer opened fire. Across the battlefield, Operation Lighthouse was unfolding. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the Tactical Operations Center aboard the carrier Prometheus, running calculations that would determine who lived and who died. Her screens showed the entire battle in real time. She watched human ships extend their anchors, create binding zones, and trap the Hollow long enough for the surviving galactic fleets to target them. It was working. 9 fleets, 200 trillion lives, were slowly being pulled to safety. But it was also failing. The Hollow are adapting, she reported to Admiral Vaughn over the comm. They are concentrating their attacks on ships with extended anchors. They know they cannot enter the binding zones, so they are destroying the ships that create them. How many have we lost? Vaughn asked. Elena checked her numbers. Her hands were shaking. 23 ships so far. 8,000 personnel. A pause. Continue the operation. Admiral, if we lose too many anchor ships, the zones will collapse. The Hollow will escape. I know, Doctor. That is why we are not going to lose too many. Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that mathematics did not care about determination. That willpower could not change physics. But she looked at her screens, at the human ships holding their positions while reality twisted around them. And she understood something that numbers could not capture. These people were not fighting because they thought they would win. They were fighting because giving up was not an option. On the bridge of the Endurance, Admiral Vaughn watched the battle with eyes that saw everything and felt too much. The first fleet was dying. She had known they would. She had made the calculation days ago when she plotted the formation that left an outside protection range. But knowing and seeing were different things. The Vesser Dominion ships were the oldest in the Armada. Their crews had served for generations. Admiral Moreth, their commander, had personally voted against humanity's admission to the Council 3 separate times. He had called humans primitive, dangerous, and unworthy of interstellar society. Now his fleet was being consumed while Vaughn watched. Communication request, her comm officer reported. Priority channel. It is Admiral Moreth. Vaughn closed her eyes for a moment. Then she nodded. Put him through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a face she had seen only in diplomatic briefings. Admiral Moreth was tall by Vesser standards, his crystalline skin fractured by the Hollow's assault. Blue light bled from wounds that had no physical source. Behind him, his bridge was chaos. Admiral Vaughn, he said, his voice strained but controlled. I have been watching your formation. Admiral Moreth. You have left us outside your protection radius. My fleet is dying while yours saves the others. Vaughn felt the weight of every eye on her bridge. Yes, I am sorry. The mathematics. Do not apologize. Moreth's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. I understand mathematics. I understand war. I also understand something I did not expect to learn from a human. The Hollow reached through his ship's hull behind him. Crew members vanished. Moreth did not turn around. What are you doing is saving the galaxy, he continued. You could not save everyone. No commander could. But you came. Despite everything my species has done to yours, you came. Vaughn's throat tightened. Admiral, if there is anything we can do, there is. Moreth's crystalline form was crumbling now, pieces of him falling away into the dimensional gaps. I need you to tell me that our deaths will matter. I need to know that my people are not being consumed for nothing. I swear to you, Vaughn said, her voice breaking. Your sacrifice will seal the rift. Your deaths will save hundreds of trillions. The Hollow will never return. Moreth nodded slowly. His light was fading. Then I will order my surviving ships to cluster together. To amplify your binding effect, we will become an anchor point ourselves. That will kill you faster. Yes, but it will make certain that none of this was in vain. He looked directly at her through the holographic display. Tell the Council something for me, Admiral Vaughn. Tell them that the Vesser Dominion chose this. We were not sacrificed. We sacrificed ourselves. The transmission ended. Vaughn stood alone on her bridge, surrounded by her crew, and felt tears running down her face. Navigation, she said quietly. Adjust formation. Prepare for final phase. The battle entered its last stage. 112 human ships formed a sphere around the First Fleet's position. They extended their dimensional anchors to maximum power, creating the largest binding zone in galactic history. The Hollow were trapped inside. But so were the ships that were meant to save. The First Fleet died holding their positions. 4,000 vessels, clustered together as Admiral Moreth had ordered, amplifying the binding effect until the Hollow could not escape. 11 billion souls, consumed not as victims, but as warriors. Outside the sphere, the remaining human ships coordinated with the surviving galactic fleets. The bound Hollow, solid and vulnerable for the first time in their existence, were destroyed. The rift that had birthed them was sealed using the combined energy of the binding field. When it was over, Admiral Vaughn's fleet had lost 112 ships, 26,000 human lives. The first fleet had lost everything, but 9 fleets survived. 200 trillion lives across 47 worlds. The greatest rescue operation in galactic history. And as the survivors began the long journey home, a question began to spread through the galaxy. Did humanity let the first fleet die? Did they sacrifice billions to make themselves look heroic? The tribunal would decide. But first, the galaxy would have to hear the truth. Counselor Veth rose from his seat with the fluid grace of his serpentine species. His scales shifted from calm blue to aggressive red as he addressed the tribunal. He had spent weeks building his case, and now he would tear humanity's hero apart. Admiral Vaughn, he began, his voice smooth as poison, you have told us a moving story. Earth came to save the galaxy. Brave humans died for species that despised them. Very touching. He slithered toward her platform. But the facts tell a different story. You had time to save the first fleet. Mathematical models show that a wider anchor deployment could have reached them. You made a choice to let 11 billion beings die. Vaughn stood perfectly still. Those mathematical models were created by theorists who have never commanded a ship in combat. They assume perfect conditions, perfect timing, perfect execution. You are saying our scientists are wrong? I am saying our scientists were not there. Veth's scales darkened. Then explain this. He activated a holographic display showing communication records. These intercepted transmissions show that you knew the first fleet was lost before you gave the order to form the containment sphere. You calculated their deaths into your plan from the beginning. Murmurs spread through the gallery. The prosecution was landing its blows. Yes, Vaughn admitted. I knew we could not save everyone. I calculated who we could save and who we could not. That is what commanders do. We make impossible choices because someone has to. And you chose to save the species who had supported humanity in the Council. Veth's voice dripped with accusation. The Krethian Star Empire who voted for your trade agreements. The Valorian Collective who backed your colonization rights. While the Thesser Dominion, who opposed you at every turn, conveniently died. That is a lie. Is it? Veth pulled up more data. The Thesser Dominion had the most powerful fleet in the Armada. If they had survived, they would have maintained their position as the dominant force in galactic politics. Their destruction created a power vacuum that Earth is now perfectly positioned to fill. The gallery erupted. Species who had lost people to the Hollow screamed accusations. Even those who owed their survival to humanity began to doubt. The narrative was clean and simple. Earth had engineered a tragedy for political gain. Admiral Korath of the 7th Fleet was called as a witness. The massive 4-armed warrior described how human ships arrived with specific targeting data. They knew exactly where to position themselves, he testified. Their formation was too precise to be improvised. It was planned in advance. General Thiessen of the 9th Fleet added his voice. When I ordered human ships to extend rescue operations toward the First Fleet, they refused. Admiral Vaughn cited mission parameters. She chose who would live and who would die. The case against humanity grew stronger with every witness. Finally, Counselor Veth delivered his closing argument. The evidence is clear. Earth knew the Hollow could only be defeated through sacrifice. They chose to sacrifice the species that most opposed human advancement. They let billions die while positioning themselves as saviors. This was not heroism. This was calculated murder on a scale never before seen in galactic history. He turned to face the 9 speakers. I ask this tribunal to find Admiral Vaughn guilty. I ask for the maximum penalty. And the first ask that Earth be expelled from the Galactic Council as a species unworthy of interstellar civilization. The gallery roared approval. Admiral Vaughn requested permission to present her defense. High Arbiter Thesenek granted it with obvious reluctance. She called no witnesses. She presented no documents. Instead, she asked a single question. Counselor Veth, in your research, did you find any record of the combined armada requesting help before the battle? Veth hesitated. The armada did not request help. They were the greatest military force in galactic history. They did not need assistance. They did not need assistance. Vaughn let the words hang in the air. 40,000 ships against an enemy they did not understand. An enemy that had already destroyed 3 colonies without resistance. And they did not need assistance. She turned to face the assembly. I requested permission to join the armada. I presented our research on the Hollow's dimensional nature. I warned the Council that conventional weapons would be useless. I was refused. High Arbiter Thesenek told me personally that humanity had nothing to offer. Desnak's crystalline form flickered, but he did not deny it. 11 minutes, Vaughn continued. That is how long the battle lasted. 11 minutes before the greatest military force in galactic history was reduced to floating tombs. 40,000 ships. 10 species. The combined might of civilizations millions of years old. 11 minutes. She let the number sink in. Then Earth came. 200 ships. 40,000 humans. We were not the cavalry riding to save the day. We were desperate people with a theory that might work. We did not know if our plan would succeed. We only knew that doing nothing was not an option. Counselor Veth interrupted. Touching words, Admiral. But they do not change the mathematics. You could have extended your formation. You could have tried to save the First Fleet. Could I? Vaughn pulled up her own holographic display. Let me show you what trying would have looked like. The projection showed the battle in real time. Human ships extending their anchors, creating binding zones, pulling the hollow into coherent space. Then it showed a different scenario. A wider formation reaching toward the First Fleet. If I had extended toward the First Fleet, I would have created gaps in our anchor coverage. The hollow would have escaped through those gaps. Not some of them. All of them. The binding zones would have collapsed. Every fleet would have been consumed. She cycled through simulation after simulation. Every scenario that reached for the First Fleet ended in total failure. There was no path where everyone survived, she said quietly. There was only the path where 9 fleets lived, or the path where none did. The gallery had grown silent. But the prosecution makes one fair point, Vaughn continued. I knew the First Fleet was lost before I gave the order. I made that calculation deliberately. I decided that their deaths would mean something. She took a breath. What the prosecution does not know is that I was not alone in that decision. She activated a new display. This is a recording from the bridge of the Vesser flagship during its final moments. It has never been shared with any government or council. I present it now. The holographic display showed Admiral Morith, his crystalline body crumbling, his light fading. Behind him, his bridge was chaos. But his eyes were clear. The recording captured their conversation. Vaughn explaining the plan. Morith understanding instantly. The question that would haunt her forever. Will it work? And her answer. Yes, I swear to you. Your people will not die for nothing. And Morith's final words. Then we will hold. For the galaxy. Tell the Council that the Vesser Dominion chose this. We were not sacrificed. We sacrificed ourselves. The recording ended. The tribunal was absolutely silent. Admiral Vaughn stood alone on her platform, tears running down her face. You wanted to believe that humanity manipulated this tragedy? That we let your people die because we did not value them. That is easier than the truth. She looked at the 9 speakers. The truth is that Admiral Moroth understood in 5 minutes what this council has failed to understand in 30 years. Earth did not come to the temporous expanse for glory. We did not come for acceptance. We came because we could help, and no one else would. Her voice grew stronger. The First Fleet did not die as victims. They died as warriors who chose, in their final moments, to fight alongside a species they had spent decades dismissing. That is the legacy you are trying to erase. Not humanity's sacrifice. Their sacrifice. High Arbiter Thesenak's crystalline form had dimmed. The light inside him flickered with something that looked like shame. "This tribunal will recess," he announced. "The council will deliberate." As the gallery emptied, Counselor Veth remained at his platform, staring at the space where Admiral Moroth's final words still echoed. His scales had turned gray, the color of uncertainty. The 9 speakers sat in their private chamber, surrounded by silence. For 10,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy without challenge. Their species had built civilizations while humanity was learning to stack stones. Their wisdom was legendary. Their authority was absolute dot, and now they faced a truth that shattered everything they believed. High Arbiter Thesenak spoke first. His crystalline voice was heavy with age and something that sounded like grief. "We failed them. The First Fleet knew the risks," said Speaker Coronis of the Velorian Collective, her gaseous form swirling with anxiety. "They accepted battle against an unknown enemy. They accepted battle because we told them they would win." Thesenak's light dimmed. "We built the combined armada on arrogance. We dismissed warnings because they came from a species we considered inferior. And when the crisis came, we sent our children to die against an enemy we did not understand." Speaker Veleth of the Krethian Star Empire folded all 4 of his arms. The human admiral made choices that cost billions of lives. The human admiral made choices that saved trillions. Thesenak turned to face his fellow speakers. And she did so after we refused her help, after we mocked her intelligence, after we told her that humanity had nothing to offer. The chamber fell silent. "I voted against their admission 3 times, Thesenak continued. "I called them primitive, dangerous, a plague upon the stars. I stood in this very chamber and argued that allowing humans into the council would be the greatest mistake in galactic history." He paused. "I was wrong." The other speakers stared at him. In 10,000 years, the High Arbiter had never admitted error. Humanity is 30 years old in interstellar terms. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their military strength is negligible. By every measure we use to judge civilizations, they should be insignificant. He looked at each of his fellow speakers in turn. But they came. They sent their children to die for species that had treated them with contempt. They sacrificed their ships, their soldiers, their futures, because they believed it was the right thing to do. Not for gain, not for glory, simply because they could help and no one else would. Speaker Coronis drifted closer. "What are you saying, High Arbiter?" "I am saying that we have been measuring worth by the wrong standards. Technology does not measure wisdom. Age does not measure courage. Power does not measure character." He stood and walked to the window, overlooking the vast tribunal chamber below. "Humanity has shown us something we forgot long ago. True strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the willingness to sacrifice for those who cannot save themselves, even when those beings do not deserve it, even when they would never do the same in return." The 9 speakers voted. The result was unanimous. The tribunal reconvened. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Billions watched across the galaxy as the 9 speakers took their seats. Admiral Vaughn stood alone on her platform, exhausted, scarred, waiting for judgment. Counselor Veth rose to deliver the prosecution's final statement, but High Arbiter Thesenak raised a crystalline hand. The prosecution has made its case. The defense has answered. There is nothing more to say." He turned to face Admiral Vaughn. "Admiral Mira Vaughn of Earth, this tribunal has deliberated. The charges against you are dismissed." A wave of sound rolled through the gallery. Shock, relief, anger, joy. Bessenek continued over the noise. "The evidence has shown that your actions, while resulting in tremendous loss, were taken in accordance with the only strategy that could achieve victory. The First Fleet's sacrifice was knowing and willing, as demonstrated by Admiral Morath's final transmission." He paused. "But this tribunal has revealed something far more important than your guilt or innocence. It has revealed our failure." The gallery fell silent. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council knew of the Hollow. We maintained containment protocols. We built warning stations. Then we grew complacent. We cut funding. We dismissed concerns. When the breach finally came, our response was too slow, too arrogant, and utterly insufficient. His voice echoed through the chamber. Humanity was not part of our complacency. Humanity was not invited to our armada. Humanity was told, explicitly and repeatedly, that they had nothing to contribute. And when the galaxy faced extinction, humanity came anyway. He turned to address the full assembly. A species 50 years old in interstellar terms solved a problem that defeated civilizations millions of years older. They did so not through superior technology, but through superior character. They asked nothing in return. They expected nothing in return. They simply saw beings in need and answered. Speaker Coronis floated forward. "In recognition of humanity's sacrifice, the Galactic Council hereby grants Earth full voting status. Not as a minor member, but as a founding species equal in standing to the original 9. The gallery erupted. Some cheered. Some protested. Most simply stared in disbelief. Speaker Veleth raised his forearms for silence. Furthermore, the Council establishes the Vaughn Accords, a new framework for galactic defense that places collaborative response above individual pride. No species will face extinction alone again." Admiral Vaughn listened to the proclamations without expression. She was not thinking about politics or status. She was thinking about the 26,000 humans who would never go home. The messages she would have to write to their families. The empty chairs at dinner tables across Earth. When the ceremony ended, she walked out of the tribunal chamber alone. A young Nesser officer was waiting in the corridor. His crystalline form was cracked, held together by medical supports. He was one of the few survivors of the First Fleet, pulled from a damaged shuttle before the final binding. Admiral Vaughn. He stood at attention despite his injuries. "I wanted to speak with you." Vaughn stopped. "What is your name?" "Lieutenant Koran. I served under Admiral Morath. I am sorry for your loss. That is what I wanted to discuss." Koran's light flickered uncertainly. "My species spent 30 years opposing humanity. Admiral Morath personally argued against your admission to the Council. He called your people dangerous, unworthy, a threat to galactic stability." Vaughn nodded slowly. "I know he was wrong." Koran's voice cracked. In his final moments, he understood that. He chose to fight alongside you, not because he had changed his mind about humanity, but because he saw what your people were doing. He saw courage. He saw sacrifice. He saw everything he had been taught to believe about honor. The young officer met her eyes. "My fleet gave their lives willingly, but it was your people who gave them the chance to matter. I wanted to thank you for that." Vaughn felt the weight of everything she had carried for 6 months. The impossible choices. The calculations that turned lives into numbers. The screams of the dying that echoed in her dreams. "Lieutenant Koran," she said quietly, "I did not save your fleet. I could not save them. All I could do was ensure their sacrifice meant something. That is enough. Coran straightened. That is more than enough. 6 months later, Admiral Vaughn stood on the observation deck of a memorial station in Earth orbit. A ring of light surrounded the planet, each point representing a human life lost at Temporis Expanse. The constellation was visible from the surface at night, a permanent reminder of those who did not return. Councilwoman Helena Torres stood beside her, watching the blue marble turn slowly below. "They are calling us the Guardians now," Torres said. "Half the species in the Council want to name their defense fleets after human ships." Vaughn shook her head. "We are not Guardians. We are not heroes. We are just people who saw something wrong and tried to fix it. And that is exactly why they call us Guardians." They stood in silence, watching Earth's lights flicker on as night swept across the continents. Billions of people going about their lives, unaware of how close they had come to extinction, unaware of what their sons and daughters had done to save a galaxy that barely knew their names. "The Council is asking for permanent human representatives on all major defense installations," Torres said. "They want our dimensional threading technology shared across all species. They want Earth at the center of galactic security." "What did you tell them?" "I told them we would consider it." Torres smiled. "After they apologized for 30 years of treating us like children." Vaughn almost laughed. Almost. She looked out at the stars, at the infinite darkness that stretched between worlds. Somewhere out there, the rift had been sealed. The hollow would never return. But the universe was vast, and there were always more threats, more darkness, more need. "We will be ready," she said quietly. Torres nodded. "We always are." The ring of lights surrounding Earth pulsed gently, each point a life, each life a sacrifice. One whole fleet had been wiped out so that 9 could return. 26,000 humans had died so that 200 trillion could live. And that is what humanity does. We hold the line, not for glory, not for recognition, not even for survival. We hold the line because someone has to, because somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, there are always beings who are afraid, beings who need help, beings who have been abandoned by everyone else. Earth remembers what it means to be alone in the dark, and we will never let anyone else feel that way again. The memorial. Lights shone against the stars. And Admiral Mira. Vaughn finally allowed herself to grieve.